Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Mason. We appreciate that. Well, hello, everyone. Hello. No. You can do better than that. Let's try that again. Hello, everyone. That's right. All right. Much better. Much healthier. Well, before we begin, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Mason for him being such a visionary with this, the orchestration of this wonderful event. One more round of applause for Dr. Mason and his team. We're so encouraged to see this, and thank all of you, of course, for taking the time to come and making it so special. It's certainly an honor for me to be here today. Knowing and doing. This is Earth, the planet we live on. Well, I mean, most of us live on this planet anyway. It's been here for 4.5 billion years, with life thriving on it for 3 billion years. Hominids, such as Australopithecus, came into the picture at 4 million years ago, and our species, Homo sapiens, separated ourselves out from that group at around 100 to 200,000 years ago. Put into perspective, our planet and life on it's been here for quite some time. 4 billion years before we came along. Agriculture and civilization began about 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, and we started domesticating animals and plants, and then industrialization took place, with factories popping up everywhere in the mid-1800s to early 1900s. So with this extraordinarily long history of life balancing itself so very well in a natural sort of Gaia manner for so very long on our planet, we humans came along and began the path toward creating serious damage to our planet, to ourselves, to other species, in only the last 150 years. A snapshot of our planet today reveals this. We're running out of land and fresh water. Pollution and human-induced greenhouse gas emissions are threatening our atmosphere and waterways and negatively affecting our climate. Our oceans and sea life are being destroyed. We're losing habitat, ecosystems, and biodiversity, with mass extinctions occurring at a rate that we haven't seen since the dinosaurs were lost 65 million years ago. Nearly 900 million people in the world are suffering from hunger. 1/2 of our topsoil has been lost, with certain regions becoming completely desertified. All this while we witness escalating rates of emerging and chronic disease regarding our own human health. Well, there are some scientists who predict that time is running out for us. We may only have 50 to 75 years remaining. These are researchers. They're not doomsdayers. I call all this global depletion, the loss of our primary resources on Earth, as well as our own health. It's still sustainability. I just think we need to hear it from a different direction, and we need to hear the whole story through an unfiltered lens. And for me, this story is changing from one of needing to simply increase awareness to one of relating that a time bomb is ticking away. These are just some of the many timelines we'll be discussing. For instance, phosphorus and nitrogen balance is irreversibly altered today. Oceanic warming will continue with rising seas for centuries from now, even if we stop all greenhouse gas emissions from all fossil fuel use today. 420 million acres of tropical rainforest will be destroyed by the year 2030, and mostly replaced by livestock and crops to feed them. But we have a daunting task in front of us regarding this environment issue, don't we? To first realize that we're damaging our planet, and to what extent? That's the first big step. And then, how to somehow fix it. Well, when I step back and look at this, I see a picture of tremendous responsibility, opportunity of profound historical magnitude. My generation and the generation of our 3 adult children, those 2 or 3 generations or combination generations in the middle here, that are in somewhat of a leadership position today, are in a unique situation to save Earth as we know it. Save life on it now and allow a livable future for those who are coming after us, or inherit the Earth from us. Or we could ignore things, act like nothing's happening, or maybe when we get around to it tomorrow, and allow it to continue on its current path to possibly being destroyed. What's at stake here, really? The extinguishing of our species and thousands of other species. We can essentially make or break humanity. That could be at stake. And if you think that this is a wild exaggeration or maybe a gross overstatement, or that this problem is entirely related to climate change, well, then that doubt, that skepticism, lack of perhaps awareness, lack of action, all become part of the problem. So we clearly need to quickly change our ecological footprint. But how do we do this? We can blame overpopulation, as everybody does, but are we really going to begin culling other humans? We can reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, but that's going to take way too long, and climate change is but one of the many tipping points that confront us. Well, the answers to those questions are quite easy, I think. We need to stop those practices and habits that we administer every single day on a collective basis globally that create an unnecessary and proportionately large resource footprint, beginning with the largest footprint of all, food, what we eat, and our agricultural systems, specifically animal agriculture. It's a larger resource guzzler than anything else we do. It also happens to be the easiest to change. How quickly do we need to change our habits or our footprint? Can we do it tomorrow? Maybe a couple of years from now? Well, I can tell you this, it's not a time for baby steps. Not at all. It requires big person steps because it needs to be done right now. It needs to be done today. We're on very real timelines. Well, it seems that many areas of the world pride themselves on being ecologically astute, don't they? Doing what they think is right for the environment. Wherever I travel, I can't help but notice the tone of buying local, conserving water and energy, reducing our dependence on fossil fuels, recycling, protecting our soil by taking down evil GMOs. All certainly important. But the problem is not with Monsanto. No, not at all. The problem's with us. Our lack of awareness, and then after we become aware, the problem then can become with our decisions, our thought process. Are we being selfish at various levels? Or are we able to become selfless with our new awareness? Well, a little bit about my journey. I became very concerned about what sustainability really does mean, and I began looking at food choices and agricultural systems quite some time ago, knowing they were part of the equation. So I stopped eating processed foods and stopped eating animals while I was in graduate school nearly 40 years ago. And since then, spent thousands upon thousands of hours researching farms, cultures, ideologies, and the effect we have on our planet by way of food production. So I've been researching hundreds and hundreds of factory farms, as well as grass-fed, fish farms, cage-free, large and small operations in the United States and in many, many countries overseas. Learning, and of course, always, always questioning. This year I'm spending most of my time trying to align governments, academic institutions, think tanks, funding organizations, all those that are in a position to move the critical mass forward. It's my goal to get everyone on the same page regarding our environment and to do this quickly. Well, we're going to examine the word sustainable pretty carefully today because this word is constantly misused. And it's morphed into so many different meanings to suit so many different needs. For most people, it still refers mostly or primarily to our energy sector or to waste, how, what, and when to recycle, or even economic or social sustainability. But rarely, if ever, I found, is food choice properly connected to sustainability efforts, especially the raising and eating of animals. Despite the enormous effect, it's apparently too challenging for everyone, culturally, socially. This is the reason that we're in a sustainability crisis today. As a global community, we've been too slow in realizing the state of unsustainability that we're in, vastly too slow in making that connection to animal agriculture. We've been indifferent to act. And yet this word sustainable is the most important word in our vocabulary that we need to define correctly. Because, well, I mean, if we get this word wrong, well, the consequences aren't so good now, are they? A little stark, but indeed civilizations have vanished based on how they use or misuse their environment. Well, as I mentioned, we humans have reached a critical and fragile point in our evolutionary journey as a species. Just in the past 100 years, a blink of an eye, we've reached the Anthropocene era, where we've acquired the power to negatively affect or change our biosphere, the litho, hydro, and atmosphere. We're ruining the very environments that sustain us and all other life on Earth. In fact, 5 out of 9 recognized or identified tipping points or planetary boundaries related to our life support systems on Earth. 5 out of 9 have already been passed, and all 9 boundaries are interconnected. As one collapses, the others will soon follow. The story begins with these two numbers. There are 7.4 billion people living on our planet today, with 240,000 added every single day. Net. Control of the growth of our population is an issue, but it's not nearly the problem as the number on the right, what we're doing to the planet. The number on the right represents the fact that there are more than 70 billion animals living on our planet that we raise and eat for food each year, and it repeats itself year after year in growing numbers, and that's the problem. But this 70 billion number is not entirely accurate. because it doesn't account for another 1.7 trillion chickens or 1 to 2 trillion fish in the world slaughtered each year but off the United Nations accounting grid. Let's look at a graphic about global depletion. Certainly there are other industries that contribute to this picture, but none have the comprehensive impact. Simply put, we're in overshoot mode, demanding more of our planet's resources than what it can supply. We've been in overshoot mode, recognizably so, since 1973. It would take 1.5 to 2 full Earths to sustain what we're currently taking from and doing to our planet. In the United States, it would require 5 full Earths to support our current lifestyle. It's serious enough on its own merit, but it's made much more so because of the layers of various influences that tend to bury the problem and bury its solutions. And what's critical for everyone to understand is that this is not just an industrial or a factory farm issue. Not at all. It's a raising animals to eat issue. And we're going to see that as we go along today. Well, let's continue refining our thoughts on global warming or climate change. First, we need to remember that global warming is just one component of a much larger, more insidious problem of global depletion, the more total effect we have on our planet. And it's not all caused by the energy sector. Discussions regarding global warming and climate change have now taken front stage nearly everywhere. But we need to remember that climate change will have the effects of exacerbation. It takes events and makes matters worse. Global warming and climate change, for instance, will not be the initial cause of these categories of global depletion. We cause these things. Climate change will worsen them. This State of Our Climate report was released just a few weeks ago, documenting the work of over 450 climate scientists. The report is gloomy at best, with many new records being set, records that we shouldn't be so proud of. But how does this relate to food choice? It's all about greenhouse gas emissions and land use. So how could the meat everyone's eating cause more greenhouse gas emissions than what's caused by powering all the cars, trucks, planes, and trains that we drive and fly every day? But instead of 18%, as that original 2006 United Nations report stated, or even their most recent figure of 14.5%, a couple of researchers found that livestock could produce, it's possible that they could produce as much as 51% of all human-induced greenhouse gas emissions. Now, most scientific organizations are not on board with this figure, but it does raise a number of questions, and there are a number of reasons for the differences in the numbers, low to high. Most important for me is the vast underreporting, the use of inaccurate global warming potential for methane, and potential bias amongst the authors of those United Nations reports, who are well-known consultants for the livestock industry. These lower figures are also without factoring in all the greenhouse gases emitted because of our demand to eat fish. The fuel, refrigeration, processing, packaging, transportation, etc. And regardless of where the exact number resides, somewhere between 14.5% or higher, and it really doesn't matter, does it? Because it's too much, and it's cause for alarm and immediate action. A perfect example of how this information is suppressed occurs every single year during our climate change conferences, held originally in Kyoto with its 1997 Kyoto Protocol. Last year it was held in Paris. This year it will be held in Morocco, where countries come together and they're trying to solve this global warming problem, at least superficially. But none of this that you see at the bottom is ever addressed. None of it. There's still no legally binding commitments, and climate scientists predict that warming will continue to reach a rise of nearly 3 degrees centigrade by the end of this century, which is 2 times higher than the goal. And this year, 2016, is on target to be even warmer than the record set last year, which is already causing rising seas, and island countries are beginning to disappear. There are some scientists who believe that we have to cut human-induced emissions by half of what they are today, 1/2 in the next 2 years. Well, how are we going to do that? How are we going to cut them by half? And then we have to get to zero net emissions by the year 2050. And yet, global emissions are accelerating, especially methane. And the largest single source of global methane is from livestock, now nearly 50%. Well, we'll have enough greenhouse gas emission problems from natural causes to deal with in the next few years, such as managing what's released from the tundra as the Arctic permafrost continues to thaw. Why not make it easier on ourselves by doing something that could be quite more simple, just like cutting or eliminating meat and dairy products from our diet? If you do the math, it's conceivable that we could exceed our budget, what's allowed for atmospheric carbon. We could exceed our budget by the year 2050 without the energy sector or fossil fuels even factored into the equation, simply due to raising livestock. President Obama and the EPA earlier this year issued a final ruling to limit methane emissions from gas and oil industry, but the EPA excluded livestock. But methane emissions from the gas and oil industry, such as fracking, actually has been decreasing in the US since 1990. There's the graph from the EPA. Going one step further, methane from livestock production in the US is the only greenhouse gas from the only major industry that Congress has created an exemption for. You can't even measure it now. To summarize the connection between food choice and climate change, we have this. Climate change is very real. It's worsening. The situation's urgent. Greenhouse gas emissions that we produce, anthropogenic, significantly affect climate change. Raising animals for us to eat is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. And lastly, any food movement away from factory farms, but including grass-fed or pastured animal systems, will not solve the problem. In fact, it's going to make it worse. More land use changes, more deforestation, a higher feed conversion ratio, more water is used, and more production of methane. 60 to 70% minimally more methane is produced per one grass-fed cow as compared to one grain-fed cow. Well, how important, as an example, is food choice in climate change? We're currently pumping in 54 gigatons of carbon equivalent greenhouse gas emissions into our atmosphere each year, 54 gigatons. If we converted all global cropland that's currently growing crops to feed livestock, and we converted all pasture land with grazing livestock, just converted those to regenerative plant-based systems that produce food for us to eat directly, we find ourselves at a net negative greenhouse gas scenario. Complete mitigation. All greenhouse gases currently being emitted by all sources could be sequestered into the soil today. But we just can't seem to get our leaders on track, despite the evidence. And again, climate change is just the first step. And then there's connecting that to food choice. And then you have to connect that to animal agriculture, and then finally is the connection to all other aspects of sustainability. So we have to get through this first step, which might seem a bit challenging, especially with statements like this from one of our leaders. Yeah, so I promised myself I'm not going to talk about politics here. And nobody's talking about politics now anyway. Why should I do that? All right, I do have one more. With statements like this, it's going to be very challenging. And I'm not sure what he really means here, but I know he's pointing at me. and I'm pretty sure I'm fired. All right, so I'm not going to talk about politics, but I do have one more. I thought I'd show you. I thought I'd show you who I'm voting for. You want to know? Here's who I'm voting for. Right here, it took a lot of thought. Oh yeah, he knows what's going on. Every aspect of global depletion has a timeline. It's not really a question of if we're going to run out of something, it's when, at our current pace. Given the predictions of nearly every climate scientist in the world, our business as usual approach to climate change isn't working. Therefore, it's time for us to get outside the box, take the right action, and do it now. Looking at solutions, prescriptions, this is what we have. The first approach is to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, just like Al Gore and everyone else recommends. But renewable energy infrastructure, such as building solar and wind generators all over the world to reduce climate change, I mean, it's a good idea. But it's projected to take at least $1 trillion per year for the next 34 years to develop. So we don't have 34 years, and we really don't have $34 trillion. So another solution to climate change would be we could stop eating animals today. It doesn't have to take 34 years. And instead of $34 trillion, it costs you nothing. That's the prescription to mitigate, not adapt to, but to mitigate climate change. Well, interspersed throughout our discussions are a few themes. One theme is how information about this particular subject has been suppressed, even mismanaged. So much so that objectives of many important meetings like the climate change conferences and others, well, the objectives aren't being met. And that all begins with the words we use. How clear are they? Are they conveying reality? These are all food movements that superficially seem to make sense. They make you feel as if you're going in the right direction because they're going away from factory farms. They're going away from processed foods, away from sugar. Now, that's got to be a good thing, right? Maybe. Maybe not. Do any of these words mean sustainable or healthy? Many would want you to think so. How about the word humane? Does humane equal sustainable? And if it does, which it doesn't, Who is it that tries to define humane for all of us? Incredibly, there is one person that the USDA and every humane certified organization in the world relies on for that definition of humane. One person. Therefore, does humane even equal humane? That's Plato. In reality, all the food movements on this list are flawed because the definitions they're using are flawed. For instance, just because something is local doesn't at all mean that it's healthy or sustainable or humane. It doesn't even mean that it should be eaten. Now, the only thing that local means is that it's not very far from here. Buying local has little to do with sustainability, other than from an economic standpoint. It's a solid idea to help nearby farmers, no question. I do that myself. And this is important, but in fact, transportation is only responsible for 4%. Just 4% of all the fossil fuels used and all the greenhouse gases emitted in the entire food production process. So it's much more relevant to view this by using a complete life cycle analysis. 2014 was designated Year of the Family Farmer, which was a good thing. I was happy to see it. But in terms of our health and the health of our environment, we must remember that it is the type of food that's being produced that matters most, not the size of the farm or the miles traveled. The most recent food movement in the United States and in Europe that's gaining considerable traction is this one, to eat less meat. So to me, the logic in this food movement is that, let's see, if you recognize that you're doing something that's wrong, hurtful, or unnecessary, hey, just continue doing that wrong, hurtful, unnecessary thing a few less times each day. Despite what the United Nations and other gold standard organizations are promoting, this sustainability issue will not be solved by advocating eating less meat, because that approach is subjective. It's inconsistent with the magnitude and the urgency of the problem in front of us. And it perpetuates irresponsibility. With every bite taken, also, it mistakenly shifts the focus to seafood, because that's not a form of meat, right? Again, it all begins with the words we use. Are they conveying reality? One of the most pressing concerns that we have today regarding sustaining our life and future life on Earth is our supply of fresh water. From 1941 to 2011, the world's population tripled, but freshwater consumption quadrupled. Earlier this year, the World Economic Forum ranked freshwater crisis as the top global risk to industry and society over the next decade. It wasn't climate change. That was number 2 on the list. It was freshwater crisis, lack of availability. There's a growing gap between worldwide demand for water and what's really available. With so much demand, there's expected to be a 40% shortage in freshwater supply in just the next 14 years. What you decide to eat has every single thing to do with this. Scientists are very concerned about water scarcity, but I think it's more about water management, isn't it? Instead of focusing on technologies, we should be first looking at choices. Is this a good choice? How about this choice? Does that look good? Are any of these good choices? They're all global averages, water footprint network, as compared to, say, these choices. It's quite a difference, wouldn't you say? It requires 400 gallons of water just to slaughter one cow or one pig in the US today. Although water on Earth remains constant, the consumptive form it happens to be in does not. 4 out of 5 people now live within 30 miles of a water-damaged area, meaning soon to run out or polluted. There are nearly 300 transboundary river and waterways on Earth where multiple countries share a vital running water supply. As we see water shortages over the next 14 years, we will surely see droughts and famine and human sickness. And then we'll see conflicts, social unrest, mass migrations, and even wars. Indeed, those living downstream will be fiercely battling those living upstream for their water rights. Climate change will make these matters worse, but not cause them. Food choice and virtual water trading through food, especially with water-intensive animal products, will play a much larger role than energy or fossil fuel use. In many areas of the world, freshwater scarcity coexists with hunger and poverty. Afghanistan, Sudan, and Saudi Arabia are raising livestock and crops to feed them while running their water supplies dry. 60% of Ethiopia's population suffers from hunger and thirst, and yet their dehydrated land is being used to support a growing herd of over 50 million cattle, the largest in Africa. And so it is with Pakistan. Syria, Mongolia, Russia, India, China, nearly every country in the world struggling with an increasing human population, dwindling natural resources, and being strangled by their meat and dairy culture. So this has to include the country of California and most of the southwest United States. Regarding fresh water, and despite the recent effects of El Nino, things aren't going so well in California. Anybody here from California? Oh, good. You know about this then. Have they given thought to where most of the water supply is going? It's not to golf courses. It's not to lawn care. Between 60 and 70% of the total consumptive water usage in California goes to livestock and crops to feed them. Our virtual water footprint in this instance is where we're extracting massive amounts of water from ancient aquifers, sometimes 50,000 years old, to produce alfalfa and other feed crops that then is being exported to other countries. These other countries like China, Japan, and those in the Middle East are running out of land and they're running out of fresh water. They know it's not wise to use their precious drinking water for hay. So they might as well get it from the United States because we don't have that figured out yet. Using less water to brush our teeth, flush toilets, or do laundry, or less time in the shower will save approximately 2 gallons of water per day for each act. That's important. However, eliminating meat and dairy from one's diet will save on average over 1,000 gallons of water per person every single day. If California, as an example, stopped growing alfalfa for livestock just for 1 year, just stopped doing it for 1 year, the amount of water saved that 1 year would be enough to provide drinking water to the entire human population of the city of San Francisco. Not for 1 year, for 66 years. The average household in the United States uses 50,000 gallons of water in 1 year, according to the EPA, indoor use. About the same outdoors. It's quite a bit of water, and it's what we're focused on in times of drought, how to reduce this. The average person in the US, though, consumes about 200 pounds of meat in 1 year, divided between 46 pounds of pig and 58 pounds of cow, 102 pounds of chicken and turkey, in addition to the 248 eggs and 616 pounds of dairy products, which equates to 405,000 gallons of water per person per year just to support that animal product diet. So a more accurate view that the EPA should be broadcasting, and we all should be aware of, is that every household of 3 people in the US, well, they use over 1 million gallons of water each year, not 50,000, 1.2 million gallons. And 96% of that outrageous water use is from their choice to eat animals. So whenever there's a drought or water shortage anywhere in the US, which there are and there will be, does our government or your community ever step up and declare a state of rationing or eliminating meat or dairy? Well, why not? Seems plausible. Livestock consume 34 trillion gallons of fresh water each year in the US alone. 34 trillion gallons by way of drinking water and crops to feed them. So then these are the timelines for fresh water. And it's really not anything that we can feel comfortable with. And what about this phrase? Millions of people proclaim their love of fish every day of the year. I hear it every day. And yet we eat them. In fact, for 98% of all individuals in this world, this phrase, I love fish, actually means this. I love to eat fish, doesn't it? Well, yeah, because if you love fish, as in loving your cat or your dog, you certainly wouldn't kill and eat them, would you? No, I don't think so. Again, it's how we use our words, isn't it? There are 3 principal ways our oceans are being destroyed, and all 3 are caused, or at least heavily affected by food choice. Raising and eating animals on land causes warming and acidification of our oceans, which is now irreversible in our lifetime. Surface runoff from livestock operations on land has caused more than 550 nitrogen-flooded dead zones around the world, comprising 100,000 square miles of areas completely devoid of life. So any meaningful discussion of the state of our oceans has to first begin with frank discussions about land-based animal agriculture. But it is fishing that has the largest impact of all. Incredibly large amounts of sea life are taken from our oceans in 3 ways. First, they're taken as target fish. You know, that's the one you want to eat. Fish are also taken out of our oceans to feed other fish grown on factory fish farms, part of the aquaculture movement. And lastly, fish are taken as bykill due to the first 2 types of fishing. Oh my goodness, that really doesn't mean too much in our oceans now, does it? In fact, our oceans are being ravaged, and yet everyone we know still eats fish. Fragile, interdependent, and poorly understood ecosystems have been devastated. Over 90 million tons of fish and sea life were caught last year, with quite a few more millions of tons of bikill, which are all those other innocent sea life caught, killed, and discarded in the process of trying to catch that targeted fish everyone's asking for. Bikill includes juvenile fish, they'll never see their way to maturity, all 7 of the endangered sea turtles. Why create an Endangered Species Act for them? Sea lions, birds, dolphins, even whales are bikill. Of the 17 major fishing stock areas in the world, all of them are either overexploited or on the verge of collapse, all of them. 87% of all the world's fish species are now affected, considered heavily depleted from overfishing practices. Well, that's quite a bit of damage, isn't it? But along comes this word sustainable to justify continued extractions. How is this word even used in the fishing industry? Who defines it? Who monitors it? And with less than 1% of all of our oceans being regulated, less than 1% of all of our oceans are being regulated, then who decides on enforcement? Whales caught in fishing nets die a very slow, painful, agonizing death while trying to desperately free themselves over a period of 6 months' time on average from the time they first became entangled. 6 months. We owe these whales much more than this. There have been an estimated 705,000 tons of non-biodegradable fishing nets cut loose from fishing vessels each year for the past 25 years, catching countless numbers of unsuspecting sea life. When researchers and ocean conservation groups discuss the topic of overfishing, they typically point to the tons of wild fish caught per year and those raised from aquaculture, and they call this production. Well, I look at this much differently and certainly more accurately by adding to these figures another 28 million tons of IUU, which is illegally caught, unregulated, and unreported, which I don't even know how they come up with that figure. Also, you have to add to this figure bikill, which amounts to perhaps another 200 million tons of sea animals per year. So it's not accurate for researchers to call any of this production, because in reality, what we're doing is destroying. Fishing, of course, destroys species of target fish, but it also destroys ecosystems, habitat, and biodiversity. All forms of fishing are destructive by definition, because it kills something. Irrespective of climate change, it's predicted that we'll lose nearly all commercially recognized sea life in our oceans by collapsing of their systems by the year 2048. And so it is with fishing under the sustainable label. Target fish are becoming extinct. We just move on to the next fish in line, creating serial depletion, and then other sea life up and down the food web are becoming extinct. A cascade effect, all part of the collateral damage that begins with us. Coral reef systems around the world are in serious trouble. Most of us know this. The Great Barrier Reef has lost more than half of its coral cover since 1985. Most would think it's due to pollution and climate change. That's what we're being told. But the primary cause of coral reef death there, throughout the Caribbean and throughout most of the rest of the world, is not pollution. And it's not from climate change. It's from overfishing. 2 new reports were released recently indicating that the amount of sea life extracted from our oceans over the years were vastly underestimated by the United Nations, as much as by 50%. And that reef fishing, that we thought was absolutely fine by local indigenous people, are doing much more damage than they once thought. The numbers of most species of salmon, cod, tuna, swordfish, halibut, and many other large species have declined by over 90% of their original numbers. Bluefin tuna and swordfish species are less than 4% of their historic numbers, still not protected by the Endangered Species Act because we would rather eat them into extinction. Killing krill now has become a pretty big business, very big business. But you don't need to eat krill or any other sea life to get your omega-3s, unless, of course, you listen to Dr. Oz. I'd rather have you listen to Dr. Mason. Yeah. However, krill is fundamental to the survival of nearly every animal species in and around the Antarctic. Here's the point regarding our oceans. It's no longer a problem of overfishing. That's a term that could be applied fairly accurately in the early 1800s. Today, it's about fishing. Well, not to worry, because now we have fish farms. over 50% of all fish consumed worldwide are now produced from aquaculture, which is growing faster than any other food sector. One reason for this tremendous growth is the very false illusion of environmentalism. Here we have another interesting idea where fish are caught in our already ravaged oceans to feed other fish produced on factory fish farms, sometimes at a ratio of 20-to-1 in the form of fish, fish meal, fish oil. Very soon, we're going to run out of fish in our oceans. Very soon. And we're going to run out of land to raise livestock, so we're going to be turning to this, a more closed-loop system of aquaculture called aquaponics, a combination of aquaculture and hydroponics that grows both fish and plants. Businesses are already snatching up abandoned industrial warehouses in many urban settings. This happens to be one in Chicago I visited. Raising fish in tanks and growing vegetables on top of the wastewater and then cycling it back to the fish. But they all use massive amounts of electricity, and even more important is that they all use massive amounts of feed inputs, hence resources. And regardless of where the fish on your plate comes from, now or in the future, is the process of catching and slaughtering fish, is that process humane? And if it's not humane, then why do we do it? I'm sure most of you know what nociceptors are, especially polymodal nociceptors. They're sensory receptors associated with feeling pain. All of you have them. Most mammals have numerous polymodal nociceptors in and around their face, their head, their neck. Well, so do fish. They can feel this. In reality, there's no such thing as sustainable commercial fishing today, especially if you apply the three factors of how that word sustainable is defined by the industry itself. There it is. This is how it's defined by the industry. And none of these three factors or objectives can be met. It's impossible. Please note the sobering statistic at the bottom of the slide. So why can't we give our oceans a break? What's inhibiting us from providing complete rest for our oceans, which is what they need? And actually, it's been what has been shown to work historically in various settings around the world. Is it because of economics? Sure. Sure it is. Culture, also economics. But let's look at that argument a little more closely. Global revenues from deep-sea fishing are at $16 billion. Well, fish sequester greenhouse gases. Who would have thought of that? Not counting all the sea life found in our reef systems, recent studies have found that deep-sea fish sequester up to 2 gigatons of greenhouse gases, which is the equivalent of $222 billion per year savings in costs in our efforts to battle global warming. So there's a clear argument, isn't there, for banning fishing in the high seas, strictly from an economic standpoint. Fish are more valuable if left alone in our oceans as live climate change mitigating agents than as food on our plates. $222 billion versus $16 billion. Case closed. With continued extraction, warming, acidification, and deoxygenation, our oceans that we once felt were so robust will very soon be unable to support what few life forms remain in and around them. So then these are the timelines for our oceans. This is what it looks like. This is not science fiction. It's not something I made up on the drive to Chicago today. It's reality. And quite sadly, this has all happened on our watch. I mean, you're looking at what we've created now passing on to future generations. While palm oil has front page notoriety, tropical rainforest loss due to livestock has occurred at a 4 times greater rate than that due to palm oil. In the last 25 years, 10 times more rainforest has been lost due to raising livestock than what's been lost due to palm oil. So be concerned about palm oil, certainly, but be 10 times more concerned about livestock and animal agriculture. This is what a few thousand to a million-year-old rainforest now looks like, because the world's food priorities are with eating livestock, not with being stewards of other living things, as we should be. Here are just 3 of the many opportunities whereby tropical rainforests could help mitigate climate change. But we keep cutting them down. Between 70 and 80% of all rainforest loss in the Amazon is due to raising cattle, with another 10% lost due to growing crops to feed them and other livestock. And remember, again, these livestock are grazing. It's not a matter of factory farming. It's not in the picture. By the year 2050, most rainforests will be gone, and the few patches that remain will have already been way past their tipping point. This, of course, means that all the millions of species that originally lived in these rainforests will be gone. They're indigenous tribes and shaman will be lost forever. Their once abundant water systems destroyed, and of course their oxygenation and climate regulatory mechanisms will be lost for the next few millions of years, which is how long it took these rainforests to develop, and we've wiped them out in less than 50 years. Many predict that we only have 60 years left before we run out of topsoil, because 1/2 of all Earth's topsoil has already been lost just in the past 100 years. Most of the world's agricultural land suffers from severe erosion. At the beginning, though, of this erosion desertification equation, at the very beginning, is deforestation. And the majority of deforestation can be blamed squarely on animal agriculture. In fact, less than 2% of all crops grown worldwide today are with organic methods for direct human consumption. Well, this is how much land is being used to raise livestock. 45% of the entire ice-free terrestrial landmass on Earth. 45%. If we factor in the 230 million acres of public lands used for grazing, livestock account for 97% of all land used for agriculture in the United States. The reason animal agriculture creates so many sustainability problems is really quite simple. It's terribly inefficient. It wastes resources, energy, and lives. You can produce 15 times more protein from plants as you can from animals on any given area of land. Meat and dairy products require up to 100 times more water than plant-based foods, and a fraction of the fossil fuel use, and of course plants sequester greenhouse gases rather than causing them. Livestock now produce 7 million pounds of urine and feces untreated in our country, which is 100 times more than the entire human population produces. To be sure, world hunger has many layers of complexity. One of the larger reasons is tied to poverty, but another significant factor is the looming shadow of our current demand to eat livestock and fish, which is indirectly tied to poverty. In fact, eating these animals ultimately affects food prices, food availability, and policy making, which then suppresses progress in developing countries. Last year, it was considered another record harvest grain in the world, with over 3 billion tons produced. But nearly half of that, 44% of it, was given to animals in the meat and dairy industries. Each year, 77% of all coarse grain produced in the world for food, 77% is consumed by livestock. So we can't blame climate change, droughts, or flooding for the world's food security issues. Clearly, the difficulty is not how or if we can produce enough food to feed the hungry or the growing global human population, but rather where all the food we currently produce globally is going. Well, solving world hunger is not as simple as giving them the grain that would normally go to livestock. It's not that easy. The solution, particularly in developing countries that I've written about quite a bit over the years, and that we're working on with a few world hunger projects right now, requires a multi-dimensional approach to sustainability, established on many levels simultaneously, with organic, plant-based food systems at the nucleus. The model for success at reducing hunger in developing countries, I believe, should look like this. No livestock. We're losing other species on Earth at an unprecedented rate. Plants, animals, insects. The current view of most scientists is more related to the rate of extinction rather than the exact number, because they simply can't keep up with all the extinctions. They were losing anywhere between 1,000 and 10,000 times the background rate, that which we've seen for the previous several thousands of years, which used to be 2 to 4 species going extinct per year. Now, regardless of the metric, it's now massive and an embarrassing amount. So why all the extinctions? And what are we doing about it? Nearly all concerned researchers agree that the primary reason for loss of biodiversity is by pastured or grazing livestock on land, loss of habitat, and by overfishing in our oceans. But these organizations are not meeting their targets. In fact, loss of biodiversity is accelerating. They'll never meet their targets until they properly address our choice of foods. The Living Planet Index shows that we lost more than half of all vertebrate animal species in the world since 1970. Half are gone. It's no surprise that during that same 40-year period of time, global production of meat and dairy products quadrupled. What we're doing to other forms of life on Earth is unparalleled in the history of our planet, where one species is causing the mass extinction of nearly all other species. It reminds me of this somewhat well-known and very appropriate comment that if all insects on Earth disappeared, within 50 years, all life on Earth would end. However, if all human beings disappeared from Earth, within 50 years, all forms of life would flourish. Even Pope Francis weighed in on his concern that the Earth is our home, the environment has rights, and that we humans are selfish in our disregard of Mother Earth. Now, whether you believe in God or not, he's absolutely right. We are essentially stealing natural resources from future generations of all species. So how do we solve this? By conferences such as this, by events such as this, knowing and doing. Over the years, I've been proposing two major categories of solutions. First, there needs to be widespread, sweeping education of the public, and those with a platform of influence. We essentially need to educate the educated, creating a higher level of consciousness. And second, we need to implement initiatives based on that education. There's so many initiatives we could talk about. Some are such as creating policies, which open the doors for businesses and help new and also young farmers and help transition existing farms from animal agriculture to plant-based systems. It's been done. It's currently being done right now. Beginning with the reallocation, though, of the $500 billion per year we spend globally subsidizing the meat, dairy, and fishing industries. $500 billion globally. So I have another solution dealing with accountability, which would get us on track much quicker. It's what I've been talking about for the last 20 years. It's what I call the eco and health risk tax, something we've never done before, because the true cost to our environment, to our own health, has always been externalized. It's never been directly paid for, with our heads always turned in the other direction. This is not a carbon tax. It's not a soda tax, which vastly understates the problem. But if we can do this for soft drinks, we should certainly be able to apply this concept to meat and dairy products. This is one of the questions of our future, along with aquaculture. It's a topic that's gaining momentum, in which I find a natural path for most people wanting so badly to hang on to the false sense of needing versus simply wanting to eat animal products. It's a path of least resistance. Let's look at a couple different ways to answer this question. And there you have it. That's certainly one way to answer it. I mean, he thinks so. My thought, though, is that we need to be fully aware of the consequences of our food choices, not partially aware. And we need to understand what we're doing to all aspects of global depletion. And we need to know the urgency of the problem. This is not a go meatless on Monday type of problem. So I have another way to answer this grass-fed question. If we gave every one of you 1 acre of land to grow any food you could, or any food you would, you could try to raise 1 grass-fed cow thinking it's fully sustainable, just like that New York Times multiple-time best-selling author is telling everyone. But in most areas of the world, 1 acre is not enough. No, you're going to need 5, 10, 20. I've seen locations that need 50 acres for 1 cow. So if you used your 1 acre for grass-fed livestock, you'd end up with about 50 to 100 pounds of a type of food that's then implicated in a number of disease states after you eat it. And along the way, you produce 6 to 7 tons of methane and carbon dioxide, and you use 1 to 2 million gallons of water for that 1 cow, while continuing the loss of biodiversity. Or instead, you could use your 1 acre to grow vegetable, fruit, grain combination, and you produce 20 to 60,000 pounds of food that's infinitely healthier for you to eat and for our planet to grow. It's astounding what you can produce on that 1 acre over the period of time it would take to raise your 1 grass-fed cow. It's quite an amazing difference, isn't it? Now imagine extrapolating that model out in terms of global use of our resources. And now answer this question about how sustainable raising grass-fed livestock really is. That's what I'm asking here before I was hastily escorted off the farm. Get out of here. No, I wasn't. And for those who still think that eating any animal is sustainable, then it's time to introduce and understand this concept, optimal relative sustainability. That'll work. How sustainable is it to raise and eat any animal product in a relative sense as compared to plant-based foods? How can we best use our resources? What foods will have the very least effect on climate change? Which foods best promote our own human health, and which are the most compassionate? All wrapped up into one neat package. This is the way we need to start viewing things in a relative sense as to then how to achieve optimal sustainability. How many of you have visited Hawaii? Terrific, great. It's a beautiful state, isn't it? Yeah, earlier this year I was asked to speak at their Capitol building, and I was quite humbled to receive an honorary award from the Hawaii Senate. regarding my work with their environment there, and it's a beautiful state, yes. But from a sustainability standpoint, it's a mess. Hawaii can't grow enough food for its human population of 1 million. So it imports over 90% of its food at a tune of $3 billion per year. But 83% of their agricultural land isn't used to grow food. It's used for grazing cattle, which then produces less than 40 pounds of what they call food, meat per acre used, 40 pounds. Hawaii's once pristine reef systems are now in serious decline. Hawaii once had the largest number of indigenous fish species in the world, found nowhere else on Earth. 75% of these fish species of Hawaii are in critical condition, with many species near the larger islands dropping in numbers by as much as 90%. The reason for this decline is not a mystery at all. It's from fishing, commercial as well as recreational. Hawaii has essentially run out of land, and they're running out of fish. It's a perfect example of where we are headed as a planet. They are just a few years ahead of us, and for now, they have the ability to import food from somewhere else, whereas we as a global society don't have that luxury, do we? The recommendations I gave to their senators are these. Hawaii needs to provide complete rest for their oceans and reefs, convert all land used for animal agriculture to organic plant-based systems, and to do this immediately, because their time is running out. Well, we don't have enough time to talk about all these today, but in the future, these are the hot topics. We will be hearing much more about these, all part of the Better Meat movement. I've been all over the world talking with scientists about this, which simply impedes our evolution toward sustainability, toward plant-based systems. Well, I found that this concept of better meat falls into these two categories for those who argue it, both of which, when compared to eating only plants, are much less sustainable, much less healthy, and of course perpetuates unnecessary slaughtering. I'd be happy to answer questions about these at any point in time. In summary fashion, meat that's produced from grass-fed, grazing livestock systems, humanely raised, supposedly, is actually less sustainable than factory farm meat, which of course is much less sustainable than plants for us to eat directly. As we run out of land and water, this metric is going to be quite important. How much feed does it take to produce 1 pound of meat? Notice the absurd 70-to-1 ratio for grass-fed beef. Now, about the Go Meatless on Monday campaign. I have to say something. If you do this, if you go meatless on Mondays, assuming you're subscribing to eating meat on the other days of the week, if you go meatless on Mondays, well, you're going to be contributing to climate change. Pollution, global depletion of our planet's resources, and your own health on only 6 days of the week then. Instead of 7, you'll be creating a false justification for your actions on those other 6 days of the week. In other words, please, let's not rest on the laurels of what you're doing right only 1/7 of the time. Now, what does eating less meat really mean quantitatively? I think it's important to look at this. Just in the 1 hour, I'm actually going to speak about 1 hour and 6 minutes here, but just in the 1 hour I've been speaking here today, over 8 million animals were slaughtered for us to eat in that 1 hour. 114,000 tons of grain were fed the livestock we're raising. But during that same 1 hour, 354 children in the world have died from starvation. 6,000 acres of tropical rainforest were destroyed and replaced by cattle or crops to feed them, and over 4 million tons of greenhouse gases have been dumped into our atmosphere by livestock. Therefore, I'm advocating a much different approach than what the United Nations and others suggest when they state that we should eat less meat, because with that approach of eating less meat, only 7 million animals will be slaughtered in the next hour. Only 113,000 tons of grain will be wasted, leaving only 353 children in the world that will starve to death in that next 1 hour. Isn't that what less means? So unlike Mark Bittman and Michael Pollan and all other eat less meat advocates and food gurus, I think these numbers should be 0. I sure do. And it's easily attainable. There's no magic involved, no hocus pocus. Nothing has to be invented. No new technologies have to be employed. It's simply what we choose to eat. And now we're going to take a quick look at the food service section to see this in action of the policy of sustainability for the entire University of California system. Why? Well, because this is a perfect example of how the efforts of well-intentioned individuals and institutions can be very so far out of alignment with reality because of the definitions they're using. So you tell me, Is this policy sustainable? How about the items I just highlighted in orange? Are those sustainable? How about their primary objective of 20% by the year 2020? Is that sustainable? I mean, who thought of that? Professor 20? And it's not much better with campuses on the east side of the country, is it? I took this right off the Dining Services website at Harvard's School of Public Health. Here at Loyola, you have an Institute of Environmental Sustainability. Good to see it. Very happy to see this. You're on board with the President's climate commitment, even the Catholic St. Francis Pledge. But even though it's a good start, none of that really matters, does it, if you haven't properly positioned food choice in your efforts, which, as far as I can see, you haven't done. So how are you ever going to get to point B? How's that going to happen? You can't get there by a narrowed focus on fossil fuels. Food choice isn't even positioned in your efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There it is. And the effect of animal agriculture isn't mentioned anywhere in the list of green thread objectives on your campus dining sustainability solutions page. I don't see it anywhere. So although you're doing some great things here on campus, certainly, in terms of metrics and audits, you're essentially measuring just fragments across the sustainability landscape. So even at these prestigious universities, West Coast, East Coast, and right here at Loyola, you'd certainly benefit from understanding and then adopting a more accurate view of sustainability, and then translating it to your students, our future leaders, and to do it now, today. Otherwise, we will continue floating around in a zone that I call pseudo-sustainability. That's exactly where we are today. Never getting to where we need to be, but thinking that we're sustainable. Well, that's a very dangerous predicament that we're in. And one more important definition that needs refinement: ethics. The ethical consideration of what we choose to eat. The topic of conscious eating has always been about animal rights, animal welfare, hasn't it? Sure, the life and death of other living beings that we consume, how they're treated. Ethics has always been about this, and rightly so. But I think it's time to view conscious eating or ethics in a much different, and certainly a much larger context. Is it ethical, for instance, for any of us to eat food that causes the extinction of other species if we don't need to? Is it ethical for the vast majority of humans on Earth to cause or contribute heavily to irreversible climate change, loss of ecosystems, and resource depletion, while 2% of us are living our lives by way of food choice to protect Earth? Is it ethical for any of us to use our planet in a way that perpetuates world hunger and extracts or diminishes the potential for future generations to survive? Is it even ethical for 320 million Americans to impose their diet-related healthcare costs on the 4 million who might choose to eat the right food? So you see, it's time we rethink ethics. It needs to be framed much differently than just with animal rights. In fact, one of the chapters in my most recent book is titled, Why Should I Pay for What Everyone Else Decides to Eat? It makes little sense to continue doing what our predecessors did in the late 1800s and early 1900s when we didn't know any better and there were far less mouths to feed with more land and water to do so. Do any of you still use a typewriter or a feather quill pen to write a message? How about the Pony Express or Stagecoach to send those messages or to travel and you thought the internet was slow? And what about candles or kerosene lamps to read with at night? Anybody out there still using those to read my books with? Why not? Why aren't you using these things? I'll tell you why. Because they're obsolete. That's why. We've outgrown them. They're inefficient. They don't fit. And so it is with all meat, dairy, and fish. The world on a global basis can no longer support the production of these things. Just like the typewriter, just like the stagecoach. We need to evolve past them and to do it today. The clock is ticking. Almost everything we do, every decision we make every day is based on our culture, isn't it? What we've learned, what someone else has told us to be acceptable or necessary, after realizing that bloodletting here wasn't so healthy for us after all, we miraculously, for the most part, stopped. Even though we've been doing it for more than 3,000 years. There are culturally driven practices that we're accepting today, especially with food choices involving all animal products, that are much more unhealthy for our planet and for us than bloodletting. And by all counts, we don't have 3,000 years to get it right. Many organizations are quite concerned about how we're going to feed the growing human population, expected to reach 9.6 billion by the year 2050, because the demand for food, including meat and dairy, will nearly double what it is today. And looking at the future, we do have some troubling trends. This is where many of our problems begin, with statements such as this from organizations such as this. They're correct. The more livestock we produce, the less secure our food will be. There's no question. The demand to raise, slaughter, and eat animals is hardly believable. Last year, the one-year figures look like this. With these figures expected to double by the year 2050, what exactly does the phrase eating less meat mean here? Maybe 73 million tons of beef? Aside from the conservation groups who are still not on track, there are a few researchers and organizations that are quite aware of the dire predicament that we're in and the very short timelines we're faced with. Any of these folks will bluntly tell you that our species is in a state of unsustainability and we can't remain on this course for very much longer. But not one of them's connecting the final dot. They continue telling us that our survival is in peril and we need to change. To change what? Exactly. And they make it very clear that we need to stop over-consuming and over-producing, but over-consuming and over-producing what exactly? Again, fossil fuels and waste are very easy targets for them to point their fingers at. You know, in the year 2000, the United Nations established 8 Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs, to address world poverty, disease, gender inequality, hunger, even environmental sustainability. Their goals failed because they did not properly address the core problem of human rights. They never accurately defined what environmental sustainability is supposed to mean or how to achieve it, because they never properly positioned animal agriculture in their efforts. Human rights and environmental sustainability and food choice are deeply interconnected. Trying once more last September, the United Nations adopted 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but these will likely never be met if leaders fail to understand the concept of how to achieve optimal relative sustainability. Well, as you know, every 5 years, the U.S. dietary guidelines rotated. These guidelines influence many programs in our country, such as the $16 billion per year school lunch program. For the first time ever last year, it was recommended by their prestigious advisory committee that these new dietary guidelines take into strong consideration the effects our food has on our environment. So that set off campaigns like this one in a positive direction, with over 100 major health and environmental groups in support of these recommendations. But it also set off a massive backlash from the meat and dairy industries, because they believe that scientific evidence regarding the environment and food has no place in the U.S. dietary guidelines. So with massive lobbying, just a few months ago, these guidelines were released, and there was no mention of the advisory committee's recommendations about our environment, none. It was very disappointing to see this. So I'm very encouraged to see grassroots efforts like these, new documentary films to help matters. And I'm not sure if any of you have had a chance to see this. It seemed like a few of you have. And I'm very excited about this new film that was released internationally on September 2nd called Food Choices. Highly recommend it. Please get behind this, watch it, and spread the word. Remarkably, this statement was made almost 1,000 years ago by someone who understood the environment and the animals around him. The choices we make together, particularly with things we consume, such as food, dictate supply, and therefore directs the use of our resources. It's not the industrial meat producer or the dairy factory farmer that'll take down that last standing rainforest on Earth. And it won't be the large commercial trawler that's responsible for catching that poor single fish remaining in the sea. It'll be the human consumer who's demanding. Knowing everything that I've talked about today, there's certainly ample reason for feeling quite discouraged, isn't there? Anyone feeling discouraged out there? Yeah, I understand. Regarding loss of our planet's life systems, what we've done to our planet, there's so much bad news in the truth around us, but even with increased awareness, it seems we'll be constantly fighting an uphill battle, just as Dr. Mason said. But in the midst of potential despair, there can be found great news. There's an easy solution to global depletion. We don't have to destroy our planet or ourselves to eat, not at all. In fact, it's the other way around. But we must change, and it is a choice. You know, with medicine and healthcare practitioners, we have this issue, I think, with patient compliance, don't we? Or what I would call more presumed compliance. A diagnosis is made, treatment plan proposed, but the patient may not stick with it. or even begin the regimen you prescribe. Regarding lifestyle changes, this will happen more times than not. So you prescribe a less drastic approach than what the patient really needs because they don't want to hear it. Cut out dairy? Are you kidding? I'm not going to do that. Hey, listen, doc, if you tell me one more time that I have to change my diet and maybe lose some weight, I'm going to walk right out of here and find a doctor who won't be so rude. This is a serious problem, I think, a pervasive issue of all healthcare professions, a problem that I call the DWT-LMP syndrome. That's right, maybe you've heard it. You know, the don't want to lose my patience syndrome. Therefore, you put the bar only as high as you think the patient will go, rather than where it needs to be. Somewhat like this. Regarding food choice and the environment, whether we're talking about healthcare practitioners, family, or friends, we all need to raise the bar to where it needs to be, and then find ways to reach it. Well, something quite telling happened at the end of the annual Global Climate Change Conference that we talked about earlier. In her closing remarks, the Executive Secretary of the conference, Christiana Figueres, provided a summary of the conclusions of 200 nations, NGOs, and researchers by stating this about our future, about greenhouse gas emissions, about climate change. She said this: the science is unquestionable. Therefore, despite the obvious effects on the industry itself, we must call for the elimination of the use of coal as an energy source, and we must do this immediately. Notice that she didn't say we should use less coal, or for us to use only local or humane coal. Pretty sure I didn't hear that. And I also didn't hear her say we should go coal-less on Mondays. In fact, she said we should eliminate coal, even though coal carries with it only roughly the same amount of greenhouse gas emissions that raising livestock does. And coal has no real direct effect on water scarcity, world hunger, loss of biodiversity, and all other areas of global depletion. But raising needy animals does. So the door's been open, hasn't it? Perhaps inadvertently by Ms. Figueres and 200 nations, but as far as I'm concerned, the global stage for massive food choice change has been set. If there's an imminent threat to our planet, to us, which there is, we should certainly be able to call for its elimination and for it to be done immediately. So when we talk about definitions, it's time to finish by reshaping the word sustainable. This is my definition. And if you think about it, we really don't want to create a world that simply allows for our existence, our survival, to be merely sustained. And that's not good enough. We want to create a world where there's quick regeneration, rapid rejuvenation, a world where we and other species together can flourish. That's my vision, and we can make or break this opportunity. It will be our defining ethos, our legacy, by which future generations will remember us. So I encourage and challenge everyone to become more aware about your food choices. Seek more accurate definitions. Understand the timelines that we're faced with, and then let's all commit to making a difference. But not just with our own health or our own life. That's not good enough. Let's commit to making a difference in someone else's life, and commit to making a difference in the long-term health of our planet. But let's do it now, not later. And let's think about making a difference every day of the week, not just on Mondays. Be a superhero for those around you, guiding them and saving lives every day. That, my friends, is what sustainability and positive change to achieve it is really all about. With that in mind, let's all of us here today, in this room, let's all of us go out and inspire others to become aware. Thank you so very much.
Time for a few questions. Yes.
Oh, that's a great question.
Question, would you repeat the question?
Yeah, did everybody hear that question? It's really a wonderful question. It's about doing and knowing and doing. She asked if any of the proposals have been adopted by Hawaii. Well, there are two components to that, two quick ways to answer that. One is that it's the first time in the history of the University of Hawaii campuses, which I think there are 11 of them, that they've entertained student advocates to work with sustainability leaders, their campus sustainability committee departments to implement a new sustainability department in research, in funding, in food, but it's too slow. They're still not implementing what we like to see, and the policymakers are considering policy changes. So on one hand, it's good, and on the other hand, it's not consistent with the timeline around it. So, yeah.
Let me go up that way, all the way to the top. Yes, ma'am.
My question is, with changing way of eating and getting rid of all these industries, that do you support? Do you think the world will have to come to some type of a wage that's paid to live because the jobs will change so much?
Yeah. Well, you have a lot of layers to that question in order to answer, but let me, I guess, summarize by saying that they're actually going to be, if you extrapolate this out, you can see that there'll be, for some of the jobs that are taken away, there are many more jobs that can be created by organic farming, organic methods. It's much more labor intensive, and the farms that have already transitioned have already noticed that. They're putting more and more workers to work in their communities, and I think that there has to be some type of subsidizing for it. I mean, this is all about policy change, and so it will happen. I mean, it's just a matter of getting the policies to change and then understanding that it will put more people to work in our workforce.
Another question? Yes, right here.
Hi, I'm curious, you're a farmer, so you're working on plant-based protein and the product, whatever it is, I'm not necessarily concerned, what I'm interested in is what the range of the substance is. You mentioned how you're feeding alfalfa laws, we have farmers who are looking at corn at $3.28 dropping. So I come with the glass half full. Because I see things like amaranth, and I see things like other grains that they're diligently working on to create these products. Impossible Foods out in California, and Creek, and pea. So what is
your question is?
What is your grain or your substance?
Well, let me help you summarize all that by saying that there are parts of the acres used in the United States and in the world to support the crops and the grazing landscape for animal agriculture. The grains that we are using, the grains that I see in general, that are just what you started that topic with, the ancient grains would be amaranth, buckwheat, quinoa. You can grow, just very quickly, give you an example, of all those acreage that I pointed out. There's only 34,000 acres in the United States that's used for buckwheat. It's less than 0.003%. And I don't have to go into all the human health benefits of buckwheat, but it also replenishes soil. It's used as a cover crop. It suppresses weeds. It's a phenomenal plant. It's also a phenomenal. It's not really a grain. It's a plant seed, but still, those are some of the things that we would see. And we support any of those ancient grains at our farm.
Question right there.
I was thinking, what are you going to do with all that?
Yeah. Well, that question arises, where you get all the animals, because I'm talking about immediate and elimination, but obviously there's going to be a transition. And so the whole thought is we have to stop raising them first. We stop all raising of animals, and then gradually the domesticated animals, you might have one or two on our rescue operation. You might see you do not need to support the propagation of all these animals. That's what's giving us in trouble. The 70 billion that is quantitatively accounted for, but also the other 1 to 2 trillion out of the oceans, and also another 1.7 trillion chickens. You stop going. That's what we're trying to accomplish right now in many of the projects, the World Hunger projects in sub-Saharan Africa. We're just asking them to stop. Most of the soil's been depleted. They have so many issues there. And so immunosuppression. So we're trying to get them to go to all transition entirely plant-based systems, and that's a good place where we can use as a model to just halt the perpetuation of livestock.
Well, if you just leave them there, then you produce anyway. So you'll have to spay them or something.
No, we've already got models. I mean, the point is that you don't continue eating livestock thinking that you have to do something with them. You have to stop producing them, and then you will gradually eliminate them.
Just one question before I go any further. Is Dr. Greger's iPad still getting around?
He got it back.
He got it back? Okay, thank you. Yes.
So my question is, there's a lot of things about scarcity all around, but let's just talk about in Chicago. There's malnourished children, there's food issues, things like that. So if I go and I take this presentation, it's a very good presentation, it makes a lot of sense. But when people are fighting food deserts in their neighborhoods and things like that, and it's more, there's not even a lot of access to agriculture, and chicken is cheaper and all these things, and big things to feed their children, but what is it that...
Great question. Everybody hear that pretty well? Yeah, it's about economics and availability. And the first thing we need to start with is the diet of the poor, those who cannot afford food. There's always going to be something available for them, but the very least expensive items you can buy are corn and flour, and it's not chicken. It's not chicken. And so you need to start supporting these type of products, because then it's a matter of demand. It's a matter of economics of demand. Eventually, the prices will start coming down. And also, right here in Chicago, you have a number of urban agricultural settings. They're not all aquaponics. They're not all fish. So go to the ones that support the hydroponics and plants that are being grown. They're doing that in New York. They're doing it in Melbourne, Australia. There are a number of places that the communities are getting behind and asking them, basically demanding that urban agriculture puts most of their time, money, and resources into plant-based systems.
Policies or petitions that we signed
Yeah, absolutely. Our nonprofit group, Inspire Awareness Now, is developing an online academy, and we're also developing an ambassador program. And we can guide you through petitions, and we can help you with it. And the bottom line is just support plant-based systems as much as you can, and the prices will start going down.
I'll take one more question. You had one earlier. Everyone else said, I know, you always have questions.
I think that the educated message is great. However, along the same lines of urban poverty is the people here that are trying to work in communities of color where these messages are hard to translate, right, from a very public health and academic perspective. How would you propose we take these messages to our communities of color where many of our residents are struggling with many other issues, including poverty and crime?
No question. One thing to remember when you're talking about in certain areas, let's look right at the school systems. And I think it's time that we start correlating and providing education for those educators in terms of what the quality, what the acuity level is for those children that are going through this system on plant-based. There have been a number of studies showing that how the levels of acuity in terms of academics, in terms of their attentiveness on eating processed foods and those laden with sugars and those meat dairy products versus eating plant-based systems. Then secondly, we have to educate those that are in a supervisory capacity for the dining services. And show them that these foods can actually be produced and they can be procured in an economically sustainable fashion. So we can help you because that's part of the program. We're developing an ambassador program to approach academic institutions, communities, and policymakers. So you have to have them all working together. There's no question about it.
The other thing, Dr. Oppenlander, is that many of us, especially some of the younger people in the room, you don't know about. Many of you have no idea about what it is and how you can eat on a lot less money than we're eating. Those in the room my age or older know about dried beans, know about how to soak beans, know how to cook, and know about all different varieties of beans, and know different ways to prepare beans, and what you can mix that with, and how you can do things with rice. You do not have to have all the stuff that you think you have. And we have gotten away from some very basic things. A pound of dried beans, which will feed a number of people, I still think you can get it for under $1 in most places, under $1. So we need to think about not always trying to keep people where they are, but try to move them to another place and try to get them to see that there are ways that they can do this that they just may not have been taught. Because a lot of those, unlike people my age whose mothers and sisters help them learn how to cook and know what to do, that's not happening. And so we've got a generation of people who are raised to look for boxes, cans, microwaves, things of that nature, and not real food.
Yeah, great point. There's no question about that. What he's talking about is just, I'm going to echo that again, is that it's much less expensive today for those type of foods than the chickens and things that you think it's not, but it is.
It really is.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead. Phyllis, yes, I'm gonna let you go ahead. You're gonna close this out, Phyllis.
My question is, what do you say to people who are vegan and plant-based, have a plant-based lifestyle, but are finding they're allergic to grains, lemons, and corn?
Okay. Well, a couple things. Dr. Mason might be able to help me out with this too, but I think there are a couple different ways to answer that. First of all, I think the amount of people that are, and he can help me with this, but the amount of people that believe that they're gluten intolerant, in terms of the raw number of celiac crew or Crohn's disease that are truly gluten intolerant, I believe they're having issues with genetically modified organisms or GMO plants. And meaning the whole spectrum of herbicides, pesticides, and how they're managed from the seed through the growing process to get to your table. And so I don't know that they have a true allergy to those. Secondly is that, as I'm sure Dr. Campbell, you arrived at some of these conclusions through what he said, and also Dr. Greger, the wide array of different types of foods, it's immense, the amount of type of foods that you can eat. You don't have to get stuck on genetically modified meat, that's available somewhere. I mean, there's so many different. You don't have to go also to maybe a little bit higher priced quinoa from Bolivia. You don't have to do that. There's so many different types of foods that wouldn't be searching towards higher up on the food chain because you're allergic or you think you're allergic, you have an allergen to some other type of plant food. Because the higher you go up on the food chain, you can develop so many other problems.
One last question. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. Yes, ma'am. It's been a long day.
I think that we have the food. However, there are so many people that don't know how to cook it. I was in Jewel, and I had some persons, and this place said, "What are those?" And I said, "Why do you cook those?" And I started in the frying.
But your question is?
And the question is, how can you fit this into,
Yeah.
almost with the question of lady at for the
Right.
community?
Right, exactly. There's no question that it's one thing to achieve a higher level of consciousness through awareness and consciousness. There's no question. But you have to implement it. You have to put it in action. But you know what? This is something I think, many people ask me when I walk out of the lecture, one of the first questions they ask me is, what can they do right today to try to help? And this is it. You all have a higher level of consciousness proven by your being here. So you all can be role models. You all can go out and help other people, assist other people, look at how to produce things from dry beans or from corn or from, there are so many different ways you can be a role model for those around you, and it'll appear there. And if you don't know, then go to the myriad of cookbooks that are out there, vegan cookbooks that can help you. There's so many that can help you. And then have community gatherings and have potlucks based on this. It's a wonderful social development, it really is. And it'll help the environment and it'll help your own health.
I think this has been great, Dr. Oppenlander, and I really want to again